You got to understand something about science. Science is like professional basketball. It's not supposed to be a contact sport. But in the big leagues, the elbows and knees fly, especially when it's under the net in the playoffs. So I have the scars to prove it. So anyway, Wikipedia gives me credit for the first proposal of the Paleo-Ocean on Mars, even if Jet Propulsion Lab, also known as just plain liars, do not. So, yeah. So anyway, the Viking lander was a magnificent accomplishment. I mean, here I am talking trash about Jet Propulsion Lab. They are magnificent technicians, and they are following orders, of course. I did a terrible thing. I went to a conference and presented this. I went to Houston last year and presented all of this evidence. And I was looking for some brave soul to come up to me and say, Brandenburg, you've got this wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. Or something like of that nature. Instead, there was stunned silence when I showed everybody this. Finally, one of them asked me, did they do it to themselves or did somebody else do it? And that is the big question now. These explosions on Mars were not natural. There is no known natural phenomenon that could have caused these effects, turning thousands of square miles of Martian surface into molten glass, spreading radioactivity all the way around the planet, filling the atmosphere with isotopic residues of a fast neutron reaction like a bomb, and irradiating the surface with neutrons. This apparently happened about 250 million years ago, long time before the human race was around. There weren't even dinosaurs around when this happened. So, when we first found this, we reported it to the Pentagon. I was working closely with the Pentagon at the time. I showed it also to nuclear weapons experts that I worked with, and they agreed with me that my interpretation was correct. They can't be quoted publicly, unfortunately. And the US government, 6 months later, sent back word to me and said, publish. Yes, very strange. Now, here's the really frightening aspect of this. Why is the government telling us this? Why is it letting, why didn't somebody call me up and say, Dr. Brandenburg, we really wish you wouldn't go to the secret program, space program conference? Please don't talk about this. I used to have very high security clearances, nothing covering this directly, by the way. That would have been sufficient. Instead, the government said, go ahead and publish.
Conclusion?
Well, I did have the benefit of working with people who were actually nuclear weapons experts at several points in my career, and I showed them the evidence, and they agreed with me. I've known about this for about 10 years, and I've known that so I basically wanted to collect every last iota, every last bit of evidence I could to make sure I was right, and then finally I decided to publish. In fact, the first place this was reported was to the Pentagon. They sat on it for 6 months and then said, basically, go ahead and publish. The Internet. It's never been released by, the enhanced image was never released by JPL. So we just took it and enhanced ourselves. And by the way, Golden was the first person, one of the first people to see the enhanced images. Dan Golden, the head of NASA. We found out he actually hated JPL. So when he saw the enhanced images, he ordered that they had to keep taking pictures. So now they've taken all sorts of pictures directly from above, like the Viking. And also the Odyssey spacecraft has come over and taken a whole bunch of pictures, which isn't controlled by JPL, and it's just a phase. The pyramid is a pyramid. The face is a face. Everything looks just like Viking, except now there's more details. You can see there's nostrils in the nose, and there's straight line ornaments on the helmet. However, the whole thing looks eroded. It looks like eroded archaeology from Earth. And so the fact that they claim to have debunked it, they've debunked nothing. Absolutely. Well, here is what we have heard. There's always been an enormous amount of tension within NASA between manned spaceflight, human spaceflight, astronauts, and robotic exploration. Now, obviously, sending probes to Jupiter, to asteroid belt, that's a job for robots. We're going to fly by Pluto, things like that. That's a job for robots. Mars and the Moon, though, are close enough we can land astronauts there. But only if there's a good reason to go there. And we heard, I worked on the Clementine mission of the Moon, where the Defense Department sent up a moon, a probe to map the moon using all of the new advanced sensors we developed during the Reagan era. And boy, there was a lot of tension with JPL over that, because this was Naval Research Lab versus Jet Propulsion Lab. And but one of the consultants we had working for us on the moon mission was named I can't remember his name, I better not repeat it. But anyway, he had worked at JPL, and he said one of the senior managers told him that we know if we find anything exciting on Mars, the astronauts will come with their big rockets, take Mars away from us. And we're talking, Mars is an incredible gravy train of funding for JPL. And this country has spent at least $30 billion on Mars. And most of it has gone through JPL. Also, if you're in my business, this is what one of my bosses told me. When I showed him some documents that were news clippings. They were clippings from a newspaper. In the middle of the newspaper is this classified document. I showed them to one of my bosses, and he was terrified. He said, "Don't show me that. Don't show it to me." Because it looked like a classified document, and he was so frightened by just the appearance of it, and the fact that it looked like a standard classified document and discussed UFOs. He didn't even want to look at it, even though it was from a newspaper.
Right. Well, the fact that there is...
You know what he told me? He said, "John, I want to just tell you something about UFOs." He says, "I've worked for the Defense Department for a long time." He says, "Defense Department policy is that we're not supposed to be interested in UFOs, and they sign our checks. So, therefore," he said, "we cannot question Defense Department policy here." He said, "If you don't like working in this field, you can certainly go work someplace else," he says, "but if you're going to work here, you cannot question Defense Department policy. And one of the policies is that we do not discuss this subject."